everybody. Welcome back to the Bible Story Night. We're going to be talking about the Exodus tonight. I hope you have enjoyed the stories up to this point. I just have a few announcements that I want to share with you. First of all, next Friday, we're going to be having Bible Story Night at 6 p.m., not 8 p.m. And the reason why is because of this gospel meeting with Clint DeFrance. Otherwise, if you're not familiar with the term gospel meeting, it's called a revival. And it will be going at 7:30. I think it's 7:30 every night for the next 9 days. And so in order to accommodate that so that other people can watch the gospel meeting, we're going to have the Bible Story Night at 6 p.m. So I encourage you to go watch the gospel meeting with Clint every night, as you will learn more about the gospel and more about saving man. But also, we will all be canceling our Bible study night on Wednesday for that meeting as well. So no Bible study on Wednesday, but we will have Bible Story Night at 6 p.m. Also, Eli Daniel from church, he gave me an idea today. I heard from his mom, Julie, that he was imitating my imitation of Joseph's encounter with Potiphar's wife, going around the house, and he was making the batting eyes and kiss me, but he was saying, "Kiss me, Aaron, kiss me, Aaron." And I thought it was really cute. And anyways, I thought of a challenge, and if there's any kids under the age of 10, you have to be no more than 10 years old to participate in this challenge. Get your parents to record you reenacting one of the Bible stories that I have told, either now or will have told by the end of the next 4 weeks. And at the end of the next 4 weeks, have your video submitted to me. I don't care when it comes. Contact me through the 5-Minute Bible Study Facebook page or by my personal Facebook account, and we'll get the video to me. And I'll be the judge of who has the best Bible story. And for that kid, I'm going to give them a personal one-on-one Bible study via Zoom, an interactive Bible story, and a personal beginner's Bible, my favorite Bible when I was growing up, the beginner's Bible. And then besides that, I'm going to offer a third gift. I haven't decided what it is, but it'll be good. And I encourage you to participate in the challenge. So good luck to anybody that wants to participate. Please let me know in advance if you are planning, if your child wants to participate in this, so that I know how many people are kind of going for it. I might be having a guest host, Noah Martin, if I can ever get the scripts ready, and we'll do one of our Bible Story Nights with Noah Martin, who will be acting with us. He's agreed to do it, although it's on me to make sure it gets done. So one Bible Story Night will not be live. It will be pre-recorded, kind of like this one had to be pre-recorded because of some audio technical difficulties on the live stream tonight. Okay, let me get my props ready, and we are about ready to go. Y'all ready? This is the story of the Exodus. Now remember, in the last story, Joseph and his brothers were in Egypt, and Joseph and his brothers died, but they had lots of children, and those children began to grow into a great number in Egypt, and the Egyptians started to get worried that the Israelites were going to overtake them and take over the land. And so the Pharaoh of that day, he started to make slaves out of the children of Israel. He wasn't like his father, the Pharaoh in the days of Joseph. And he started to make those Israelites carry heavy burdens every single day and make brick. They had to lay brick and mortar every day, and those taskmasters from Egypt would whip them. Whoop-ah! Whoop-ah! And make them work harder. And it was such a burden. They cried out to God, "God, please deliver us from the Egyptians." And finally, God heard their prayer. But it wasn't until after the Pharaoh of Egypt got so worried that he began to kill all the firstborn males of the Israelites. One of those Israelites was a Levite, and she took her baby, 3 months old. She had hid him for 3 months, and she made an ark, a little ark, out of bulrushes, which is like weeds, And she made an ark, and she covered it with pitch, and she put her baby in the ark, and she pushed him out to the river. And she wanted to make sure that he didn't get killed by the Egyptians. And so that baby floated down the river. And during the next day, or the same day, Pharaoh's daughter, she was taking a bath in the river. And she was washing up to make sure she was good and clean for dinner that day. And she saw something out there. And it was the ark. And the baby's name, by the way, very important, was Moses. That's going to be the key figure in tonight's story, Moses. And so she calls one of her maidens and says, go get that. She talks in Egyptian, so she goes, blah, 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 blah. And that means, go get the baby. And so they bring it back and she says, blah, 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 blah. She said, that's a Hebrew baby? Hebrew is another name for an Israelite, okay? And Moses is an Israelite, and the children of Israel are the ones in Egypt. And they said, yes, would you like us to go get one of the maidens from the Hebrew women to nurse the baby? And she said, blah, 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 blah. And that meant yes, in Egyptian. You don't know that I speak Egyptian, but that's the second language in my arsenal. And so the maidens go, and by the providence of God, this is the first example that God's in control this whole time. It's Moses' own mother that they go and they get him to nurse him to be a young man. And so this Moses grows up in the house of Pharaoh because he was taken by the daughter of Pharaoh, and he grows up royalty. And one day, after he's grown, he's learned all the fine arts of Egypt, and he's become a very educated man. He goes out onto the veranda one day, and he's looking out over Egypt like he does in the morning, and he sees something. What is that? And it's one of those Egyptian taskmasters whipping and burdening one of the Israelites. Whoopah! 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 And he can't take it anymore. And so he goes up from behind and he grabs this and he kills the Egyptian. And he looks and nobody's watching. So he runs off. But listen, guys, you'll never get away with that kind of thing. They were watching. And so the next day, Moses comes up to two Israelites, and they're fighting. And he says, guys, what's going on? And they look at him, and they said, are you going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian? He was so worried he didn't know that anybody knew about that. And so he took tail and run, baby! Because Pharaoh was mad. And so Moses is running for his life, man. And he finally gets to the land of Midian. And he falls down at a well. And these women come up to him. They're nice and pretty women from Midian. And they come up to him and they can't get water from the well. So, you know what? It's funny how when women pop up, sometimes men just all of a sudden get a little more strength back and they can just pull water out of the well. And that's what happens this time. And so he pours some water out of the well, and those women go to their father Jethro and they said,
Daddy, this young man pulled this water out of the well for us today.
And he said, why would you be so rude not to invite him home? And so bring that boy home. And they go get Moses, and they offer to let him stay there, and so he stays there, and he ends up marrying one of those women. He marries one of the daughters of Jethro, the Midianite, named Zipporah. That's his wife. Well, Moses ends up being a shepherd. He grows a big beard, manly beard, and one day he's out keeping his father-in-law's sheep, and he's out in the wilderness a little bit, and he's got his staff, and this will be my staff. He's got his staff, and he sees something in the distance. And he gets a little closer. And he gets a little closer. And it's something miraculous. And it's a burning bush that's burning, but without any fuel. And it's not getting consumed. It's just burning, but it's not burning up. And so he steps in to this little area where the bush is. And a voice comes out.
Moses! I am the God of your father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The place where you stand is holy ground. Take off your sandals.
And he's so worried. Yes, God. He takes off those sandals. And Moses says,
I want you to go to the land of Egypt, and I want you to deliver my people from their bondage, for I've heard their cries out to me.
And Moses says, but Lord, who am I of all people that I should go deliver Israel. And God says,
You are good enough.
he doesn't really say that exactly, but he says something similar. And then Moses says, but Lord, what if they say, what's your name? Who are you? Just kind of more of the same. And he says,
Listen, I will give you a sign and you shall work these miracles.
and so he tells him, he says,
Take your staff and throw it on the ground.
so he throws it on the ground and it turned into a snake. Remember the snake from the Garden of Eden? And God said,
Pick it up again.
so he picks it up again and it turns back into a rod, a staff. And God said,
Put your right hand in your bosom.
and so he puts his right hand in his bosom and he said,
Take it out again.
and he takes it out and it's leprous as white as snow, a terrible rotting disease. And he said,
Put it back in your bosom.
so he puts it back
Pull it out again.
and he pulls it out and it's as white as a baby's behind, or it's as fresh as a baby's behind. And he can't believe it. It's a miracle. And God says,
By these signs I will show you, the people of Israel, that you are from me.
and so he has one more objection. And he says, but Lord, I'm not an eloquent man. Which probably means, if you're asking me, he probably had lost his accent from Egypt. And so he talked with a southern drawl, kind of like this by now. And he said, Lord, I'm not eloquent. How am I supposed to convince these people that I'm from God? And God says,
You have your brother Moses in Egypt. He will be your spokesman.
and so there's nothing else Moses can do. So he reluctantly follows the commands of God and goes to Egypt to deliver Israel. And so he packs up his bag and he goes to Egypt. And he shows up the first day on Aaron's doorstep. And he says, my brother, God has sent me with a message. And he's probably talking like this the whole time because he's a southern boy now from Midian. And he says, Aaron, and he's talking to the other Israelites. He says, watch this. And he throws down his rod and it turns into a snake. And they're like, whoa, dog, what's going on? And he says, that ain't all. And he pulls his hand out of his bosom and it's as leprous as white as snow. And they're like, whoa, what's going on now? And he puts it back and it's as fresh as a baby's behind. And they're like, this must be from God. And he says, yes, it is. And we're going to get out of here. Y'all hear me now? And so they hear about this in Pharaoh's court. And Pharaoh, he wants to see Moses. And so Moses, he goes with his rod into Pharaoh's court and he goes up to Pharaoh and he says, I'm from God and he said to let my people go. You hear me now? And Pharaoh says, boy, you must be outside your mind. Do you hear what you're saying to me? And Moses says, this ain't my first rodeo, man. Let my people go, God said. And so he takes his rod just like God said and he threw it on the ground. And it was amazing mic drop because those magicians that Pharaoh had, he said, Janus, Jambres. And they come out with their rods and they threw them on the ground and they turned into snakes too. But you know what? Moses' rod swallowed up all the rods of the Egyptian magicians. And they didn't have anything to say about that. Well, that gave a little fire in the bones of those Israelites. And they stopped to work as hard because they were starting to believe that maybe Moses was right. And Pharaoh got mad, man. He was mad and he told the taskmasters, he said, lay on the quota of bricks double for the Israelites tomorrow and tell them they have to gather their own straw for dinner. And tell them and whip them twice as hard. And so they're out there the next day and they're whipping those Israelites. Whoop-ah! Whoop-ah! And those Israelites are having to carry double loads and work more bricks than they're crying. They come to Moses at the end of the day and they said, Moses, why are you doing this to us? Why did you have to come and make things worse? Whew. That was a bad one. And so Moses, he says, guys, just listen here. We're going to get out of this. Don't worry. And so he goes over to Pharaoh's court and he goes up to Pharaoh. Who is it? It's Moses. Come on in. That was the gatekeeper of Pharaoh. So they let him on in. And he goes up to Pharaoh and he said, now I talked to you yesterday and you ain't done what I told you to do. So if you ain't bound by the river tomorrow at noon, you ain't going to see what's about to be one of the greatest miracles you ever did see. So they go down there to the Red Sea the next day at noon, and Pharaoh's there too. And he takes his rod, and he taps the water. And that water turns into blood. And all the water in Egypt is turned into blood. In fact, even their cups turned into blood. And there wasn't any water in Egypt that weren't turned into blood. But Pharaoh, he was looking at that and he was not impressed. He said, Janus, Jambres. And they come over and he said, do something. Do what he did. And so they take some Kool-Aid packages maybe, and they put him in some water, and they turn what they got into blood. And they said, look, we can do the same thing by our gods of Egypt. And so he said, we will not let your people go, you silly man. And he said, man, Moses is speaking now. He said, man, that ain't the cool thing to do. That's going to get you in lots of trouble. And so the next day, Moses comes out and he waves his rod to the east, and frogs. Oh man, you ain't never seen frogs like this. And what does the frog say? Y'all know?
Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit.
And frogs are coming out of everything. They're coming out of the drawers. When they open the drawers, it's frogs everywhere. And out of the covers, frogs. And when they open their mouth, frogs jump inside their mouth. They're everywhere. And it's just, oh man, they can't do anything without frogs, frogs, frogs. And finally, the next day, Moses is called into Pharaoh's courtroom. Who is it? Moses. Come on in. And he goes in, and he goes to the throne of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, take these frogs away. And Moses says, now I told you, brother, I'll take the frogs away, but you got to let us go into the wilderness to sacrifice to our God. You hear me? A fur piece out there. It can't just be no dilly-dally. You hear me? And Pharaoh says, okay, but take away the frogs tomorrow. Moses is like, you crazy. I don't know why you'd want them taken away tomorrow, not today, but okay. So tomorrow, around noon, those frogs are swept away and they're all gone, just like Moses said they would be by the power of God. And guess what? Pharaoh didn't keep his word. Now, I don't want you any kids saying you're going to do something and not do it, because that's lying, that's deceiving, and Pharaoh does a good job of that, but it's not good. You hear me? That gets you in lots of trouble. It gets you in much trouble as Pharaoh. Keep on listening. So the next day, Moses goes out there and he takes his rod and he waves it across the sky, and lice come. Lice are those little bitty white creatures that get in your hair and they'll shed and create more. And oh, it's nasty. Some of you kids, y'all have had lice before and you know what it's like. It itches. Oh man, it itches. Lice everywhere. And where were we at? So there's lice everywhere, and you know, up to this point, the magicians were able to turn water into blood just like Pharaoh, and they were able to reproduce frogs like Pharaoh did, but they could not reproduce lice. And they told Pharaoh, they said, boss, we can't do this one. And he just glared at him. And so the next day, Pharaoh calls him in, and he comes to Pharaoh and he says, who is it? And so it goes through that whole cycle again. And he goes in, and Moses said, what do you want, boss? And Pharaoh says, take away the lice. And Moses says, I'll do it, but you got to let us go into the wilderness to sacrifice to our God. And Pharaoh says, you can go into the wilderness, but don't go far. And Moses says, dude, you ain't getting what I'm telling you. This ain't going to work. Do you hear me? We got to go. Stop this now. You're strutting my okra. And Pharaoh, he pushes him out. Well, the next day, Moses waves his staff by the power of God, and the lice are gone. But on top of the lice, because Pharaoh hardens his heart and won't let the people go, flies come. And flies everywhere. They're probably not regular house flies. These are probably big, big dragonflies that bite all over, and they hurt. And these flies are everywhere, but none of the Israelites are touched by the flies, only the land of Egypt. And so there's a big separation between Egypt and between Israel. And they just can't take it no more. And finally, Pharaoh won't let the people go because of the flies, and so Moses sends a pestilence. And this disease, kind of like the coronavirus, but a different kind of pestilence, takes over, and all the cows, moo, they start to die, and all the horses, they start to die, and all the camels and all the animals start to die because of this great pestilence. And Pharaoh calls him in, and none of the Israelites' herds are dying, but just the Egyptians. And finally, because Pharaoh won't let the people of Israel go, God tells Moses, he says, I want you to take some ashes from a fire, and I want you to take them tomorrow morning, and I want you to throw them to the sky, and then boils are going to come on the people of Egypt. And so the next morning, Moses takes some ashes from the fire, and he throws them up in the air, and boils start to come up on the people of Egypt. Big boils, and they hurt.
Mama, please help me!
But Mama can't help you, because Mama's got boils. And Mama's saying,
Daddy, please help me! Oh, the pain! Oh!
and these Egyptians can't take these boils anymore. Finally, Pharaoh won't let God's people go. And Moses tells him, man, somebody must have hit you on the head when you was born, because I figured you'd learn your lesson by now, but because you won't let people go, I'm going to have to call to God, and God's going to rain down hail and thunder and lightning tomorrow. So sure enough, just like every other time, Moses lifts his staff to God, and down comes hail. Huge balls of hail, like baseball size, and they're killing all the crops, and they're killing all the cattle out in the pasture. And finally, it's too much, and Pharaoh says, enough! And he calls Moses. Who is it? It's Moses. Come on in. And he goes to Pharaoh's throne, and Pharaoh says, I'll let you go into the wilderness. And Moses says, man, I've heard you say that like so many times now I've stopped listening. You ain't going to let us go. Pharaoh says, I'll let you go, just please take away the hail. And so Moses says, okay, I'll take away the hail, but you got to let us go. And so he goes out the next day, and sure enough, Pharaoh hardens his heart. And so we got 3 more plagues left, and one of them, the next one, was locusts. And these locusts come. Moses calls locusts from heaven, and they start consuming everything. And everything that the hail didn't destroy, the locusts come and they consume everything. And there ain't nothing. The whole land of Egypt has gone to pot. And Pharaoh, he won't let God's people go. And so finally, the 9th plague comes. And Moses comes to Pharaoh and he says, let God's people go, or there's going to be darkness over the land. And Pharaoh, he won't let God's people go. And sure enough, the next day at noon, in the middle of the day, guess what happens? And the people are in darkness for 3 days, and the Bible says that none of the Egyptians moved for 3 days. It was so dark that people could feel the darkness. Oh, talk about the boogeyman. So dark. And finally, Moses comes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, please, let the darkness be gone, and I will let you go into the wilderness. I'll even let you take your children, but you can't take your cattle. And Moses says, dog, you gotta be getting the memo by now. We can't go out there without our cattle to sacrifice to God. What's a sacrifice without our cattle? This don't make no sense, man. And Pharaoh says, I'll do whatever you ask if you'll just take away the darkness. And so he took away the darkness. But guess what? Do you think that Pharaoh let Israel go? And so it came down to the last plague. And after this plague, Pharaoh was going to drive the children of Israel out of Egypt. He was going to be so mad. In this last plague, Moses said, because you won't let the people of Israel go, in a few days, God's going to send an angel to kill all the firstborn in Egypt. And some of those Egyptians, they believe in God now. You better believe it, they believe in God. And they're starting to think, oh no, but Pharaoh, His heart is so hard, he will not budge. So Moses says, okay, man, I'm going to go back to the house and we'll see what happens. So he goes back to the house and he tells all the children of Israel, hear ye, hear ye. In 5 days, God is going to send a death angel to wipe out all the firstborn in Egypt. And if you don't do exactly as I say, then the firstborn in your house will die too. Now, one of the things we need to remember is that when God asks us to do something, we got to do it exactly like he asked us to do it, or he wouldn't have asked us to do it that way. And Moses says, you got to listen to me now and do exactly as I say. There's going to be a meal we're going to eat in 4 days, and it's going to be life or death. And so do it just like this. I want you to take a lamb, 1 lamb per house. It's got to be a male lamb. And you got to look at that thing and make sure there's no spots or blemishes in it. I want you to put it in quarantine for 4 days and make sure there's nothing wrong with it. It's got to be a male animal, firstborn male lamb. And it's got to be of the goat or a lamb. Could be either one. And then he says, on the 4th day, I want you to take that lamb and I want you to cut its throat. And I want you to take it and roast it in the fire. Don't boil it in water and don't eat it raw. I want you to roast in the fire now. And I want you to take a big basin and take the blood from that lamb. And I want you to take some hyssop and cover the lintels. That's the door frame. And I want you to cover the doorpost with the blood of that lamb. And when the death angel comes and he hovers over that house and he's going to see the blood on the lintels and the doorpost, he'll know to pass over that house because it has faithful children of God in there. And he says, when you are on the inside of that house eating, I want you to have bitter herbs and unleavened bread, and I want you to put your belt on, and I want you to have your staff in hand and your sandals on, and I want you to be ready to flee from Egypt that very night. Do you hear me? And so those Israelites, they do exactly like he says. They kill up the lamb and they get it all ready, and they're ready with their belt on and their sandals and their staff in hand, and they're eating with their left hand and they're holding their staff with their right hand. And then the death angel comes. And he goes through all the land of Egypt. And every house that didn't have the blood on the lintels and the doorpost, God killed the firstborn through the death angel. And there were cries in Egypt that remind us of the cries in Egypt when all the firstborn of Israel were killed. When they opened up the door the next day and they saw the firstborn dead on the threshold. And Pharaoh was so mad and so upset that he told Israel, get out of here. I don't want to see you ever again. And the people, they were all, remember? They were eating with their staff in hand, their belt on, their sandals were ready, and they got out of here. Well, they headed off to the Red Sea. And after they got into the wilderness, God was leading the people of Israel in the front by a pillar of smoke and fire. And the people of Israel and Pharaoh were over there, and they were starting to think, man, why did we let those people go? And that started to knock some sense into themselves, they thought. And they said, what did we do? And so Pharaoh, he told 600 chariots to arm up. And I want you to have your swords in place. And we're going to go after those Israelites and bring them back to Egypt. And so they got on their chariots and they were riding on to get the children of Israel. And the children of Israel get to the Red Sea. Big sea. Oh man, lots of water. Can't cross it. And then over the horizon comes those Egyptians riding on their chariots, and the people are scared. Ah! And they grabbed Moses and they said, Moses, what have you done? Was it not bad enough where there aren't graves in Egypt we could be buried in that you've brought us to the wilderness to kill us out here? And Moses says, don't worry, because the same God that brought down the 10 plagues is going to deliver us now. And that pillar of cloud and smoke came between the armies of Egypt and Israel, and it kept the Egyptians from getting to the Israelites. And so that night, they were between the Egypt and the sea, and they slept that night with one eye open. And that pillar protected them. And in the middle of the night, Moses took his rod and he spread it over the waters of the Red Sea. And you know what happened? That water started to separate. And the ground began to have a clear path across the sea. And Moses started to lead the people across the sea. And after they got about halfway through the Red Sea, that pillar of smoke from God lit up. And the people of Pharaoh started to ride after them. And they started to try to chase them down. And as they got about halfway into the sea, their wheels started popping off of their chariots. And then the Egyptians, they remembered and they said, we've got to turn back because the God of Israel is assisting them. And so they finally turned back around and they started tugging down and running. But it was too late then, man. It was too late then. And the walls of the Red Sea, after the Israelites got across it, started to come down over the Egyptians and swallow them up. And it killed all the Egyptians that day by the hand of God. And that's the story of the Exodus, the greatest event in all the Old Testament history. There was no event of salvation like the Exodus from Egypt until the day of Jesus Christ died on the cross. That was the greatest act of salvation ever. But up to that point, it was the Exodus. Next time, we're going to talk about the wilderness, as Israel went through the wilderness on the other side of the Red Sea, and some of the stories through there, they're pretty interesting. And so log on with us next Friday at 6 o'clock. Don't forget, 6 o'clock. And I will remind everybody about the challenge. Don't forget, if your child less than 10 years old wants to participate, please contact me, and we'll try to set up a video relay. So enjoyed it. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.